Memo to self, never follow Matt. I want to thank the Coast Salish people for allowing us to be here. I also want to thank my colleagues, several of whom are here, and also one of the greatest mayors ever, Mike Harcourt, who's sitting quietly in the back. I'm going to speak about revitalization of the downtown Eastside. This is on, right? Yeah. Within the context of the region, and I'll pick up on some of the themes that Matt's talked about. I'm going to skip, because of some of the things he said, I'm going to make 2 points at the beginning. One is that I'm doing work in False Creek South, which a number of us were involved with. It's almost 40 years ago, and since Habitat, and then some of the ideas that are at the base of Vancouverism. And looking now at how do we replan that area and assure affordability, I just make one note that in the co-ops on False Creek South that people like Ann and others were involved with, you can now rent a 1,500 square foot unit, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, for about $1,100 a month. And you can be cross-subsidizing your neighbors while you're doing it. So I'll just give a hint that somehow the whole way in which we're tied into a land market that keeps exploding and in the way that Matt was speaking of is true. And some of the solutions we may have to go back to the future for. But I'm going to speak about the downtown East Side in the context of the region, but also particularly focusing on our political culture. As Bob Williams mentioned last night, one of the most interesting features of Vancouverism is that our downtown core, with its glass towers, and we even put the mountains there. I think, Mike, I think we put them there, is immediately adjacent to the city's historic core and the downtown East Side. Much of Vancouver's poverty, mental illness, and addictions seem to be in plain sight of others, and it's fair to say that the same forces that generated the towers and was also involved in some of the despair that's been right adjacent to it. I'd also say that the approach to the solution to this, I think, rests in looking at what happened in the 1960s and 70s that led to the development of the downtown East Side, and to see how they are related to Vancouverism and what we might be able to do in renewing some of those interests and forces today. A lot of this work stems to the fight over the freeway and the vision of a city made up of livable and inclusive communities. Of particular importance is the fact that the proposed freeway covered many different neighborhoods. And to stop this inevitable force, it required people cooperating from different interests, different classes throughout the city, put people in kind of intimate touch with one another that might not have normally allied together. At the core of the movement that took place across the city were Strathcona, Chinatown, and what was known as Skid Row. Historic neighborhoods that were being prepared for large-scale urban renewal and the displacement of its populations. And some of the things the city did regarding this were absolutely racist and shameful, especially in Chinatown and in Strathcona. But what was proposed was worse, a freeway interchange. In this environment, incredible leaders emerged and joined hands across the city. We have several of them here, but I think particularly of Mike and others, and a number of these individuals shape the way in which the city and the region and the province are governed. What Gary Pageant last night called, he didn't mention her, but Darlene Mazzari's feminist approach to regional governance, I believe, had its roots in this kind of struggle of groups who normally wouldn't work together, cooperating together. At the same time, Bruce Erickson, Libby Davies, Jean Swanson, others who are still active today, helped transform Skid Row into what became known as the downtown Eastside, a community made up of the people who built this province. And that was its main thing, that we as a society owed something to the resource workers who really created what Bob Williams would call the gravy that so much of Vancouverism has benefited from. It also included, increasingly over time, retired workers, injured workers, and others who were addicted to drugs and alcohol. During this period, the Downtown Eastside Residents Association took on incredible challenges. It did the impossible. It got fire sprinklers into the SROs, despite the fear that it would close these buildings, reduce the overselling of alcohol in the pubs. But one interesting example is it fought for the Carnegie Center. The Carnegie Library was going to be demolished for a parking lot. And the way that they did that was by forming an alliance with the unionized workers who were building the Granville Mall. No Carnegie, no mall. It was an alliance and a partnership of reaching out to others. Bruce and Libby went on to join Mike and Harry Rankin, Bruce York, I imagine in many interesting conversations on council. They took some of these ideas from the inner city and applied them elsewhere in the city and to some degree the region, and then for some the province. Jim Green, Stephen Leary, and others took over the leadership of DERA and gave priority to building hundreds of units of well-designed social housing. That was the core of DERA, but also the same individuals went on to initiate programs to create jobs and on-the-job supports for people with challenges to employment. And they put a particular focus on Woodward's, which at one point was going to be 400 condominium units, as a symbol of the kind of revitalization, a mix of incomes, a mix of uses. During this period, there were important transformations in the structure of the economy. Hastings Street lost ground because of the shopping malls and big box retail and other things that had nothing to do with the residents in that area. It had been the commercial center of the region with a strong low-income community. And also the resource industries changed. Mechanization, unionization changed the nature of the kind of rotation in and out of the downtown east side of people with money. During the 1980s and 90s, a growing number of marginalized, or might be even called discarded people, began coming into to the inner city, particularly with the closing of the mental institutions, but also other young people who never had a chance really to contribute to the economy. The rationale, what do we owe these people, had to be reestablished. And it was different than the pioneers who built the province in terms of its rationale, and different still from what happened to the First Nation people who had lived here before. Many people found themselves in the downtown east side, and where they could find affordable housing, health care, and a culture of support. A new leadership emerged, including people like Mark Townsend and Liz Evans from the Portland Society, TIRA, Lookout, United We Can, but also Vancouver Native Health, the first urban Aboriginal health service, Vancouver Native Housing, Luma Society, Urban Native Youth, the Vancouver Friendship Society, that played a very important role in serving a diversity of people. The Downtown East Side Planning Program took place in this context. And I won't go through all the detail of it, but we developed a program. We looked at the forces of gentrification as we understood them, and we tried to design a program that responded to those forces. And the priority was housing. There's no point in talking about it if people don't have access to the land. And generally that meant social housing, taking housing out of the private market. But we also looked at, we've heard of the 4 pillars approach, innovations, national and in some cases international innovations in healthcare to reduce the rate of AIDS and HIV, from third world standards to terrible, but at least significantly improved standards. We also looked at public spaces and the culture, because these initiatives were particularly important to the low-income people. And here I'm just going to make a differentiation. I think that the reason for supporting low-income housing and low-income population has to do, it's more important for low-income people. The sense of place, the sense of community really is essential. But there's another group that's also very important in this work, and that is the moderate income workforce. And in one sense, the moderate income workforce needs the opportunity to be near where they work. Not every person being forced to be in the same community, but having that opportunity. And both need protections. What's almost tragic is when those two groups are put, seen as enemies or seen as having conflicting interests. Because the key, I believe, to the future of the downtown Eastside and its revitalization has to do with forming those kind of alliances within those kind of residents, the moderate income workforce that needs access that the downtown and other employment areas within Vancouver can't function without, as well as protecting the low income residents who want to be in that community. So the thing I was going to say was, in Vancouver, there's lots to be done in the downtown Eastside. But really, to quote Arminia Mercado, who was head of the School of Planning and Architecture in Brazil, when she came up here when we were working on a project there, she said, "Oh, Nathan, show us your 10 blocks of poverty again." Well, really, the downtown Eastside is extremely important because of its the real things that are happening there and its symbolic importance to what Vancouverism is about. But the majority of low-income people, and certainly the majority of moderate-income people, live outside the downtown Eastside, live outside the city. And the challenge for us right now is in how do we develop the political culture that has provided at least some protection for low-income residents in Vancouver? How do we deepen it here in the city? But also, how do we introduce that elsewhere in the region? And this I would pose kind of two visions. It would be great if we had the masculine version of top-down regional planning that could impose this through regulation and funding and so on. But I'd suggest that behind that door is the face of Rob Ford, because of the anger and frustration of moderate income workers and others who are desperately trying to make improvements in their lives, commuting over an hour a day each way and struggling to maintain a standard of living. Behind the other door is the beautiful face of Darlene Mazzari and a culture of cooperation and reaching out and forming alliances. The challenge for us is how do we take the debate, some of which we've had in Vancouver, but working with others in places like Abbotsford, where the solution seems to be no harm reduction services and spreading manure on the housing of the homeless and turning down social housing projects. Or next door in Burnaby, where Burquitlam, Metrotown, and Burnaby Edmonds, major focuses for moderate and low-income housing and immigrants and refugees, the real East Vancouver of Vancouver at this time. They're being torn down in the name of new urbanism, in the name of transit-oriented development. So we have to inform ourselves, hold ourselves accountable, as Matt was saying, and also really look at what's happening and why and who's benefiting, and how do we spread the ideas of inclusivity that were and should remain at the heart of Vancouverism. So thank you.